Hello and welcome to my podcast. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who integrates my training in psychology and scripture studies to help understand the Gospels from a psychological perspective and seek out new pastoral teachings for Christians in these modern times. My podcasts are between 7 to 10 minutes in length, where I share insights and reflections that I hope will be useful to you. Today's podcast is from Mark chapter 6, verses 7 to 13. This gospel will be read in churches on July the 14th, 2024. Today's gospel is from Mark. It is a teaching gospel. Jesus is sending his disciples out to gain some missionary experiences. We don't know when during his ministry or where Jesus sent the disciples. We don't even know how long was their missionary experiences either. In this gospel, Jesus is giving his disciples wise advice. The first thing is that Jesus sends the disciples out 2 by 2. Initially, when I read the passage years ago as a young priest, I thought Jesus could have doubled his impact by sending them out alone. It becomes clear that Jesus is not concerned with numbers. He is making several teaching points about spirituality and faith that are helpful in deepening our faith today. Spirituality and faith are relational. This is not new. Jesus started attracting disciples very early in his ministry, even before performing miracles. Jesus knew that faith and spirituality grows in community and within relationships. Jesus knew that the disciples would be able to support each other and, when necessary, hold each other accountable. They also would have the opportunity to learn from each other. The second point of interest are the instructions Jesus gives his disciples on how to be prepared for the journey. Apart from sandals, they are not supposed to bring anything else. They're not even to bring food or even money. It seems strange advice, as it appears Jesus is saying, don't be prepared. Jesus, like many of the teachers of the time, would make a dramatic statement to make their point. I don't think Jesus meant for us to take him literally. For example, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18, verse 9, that if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Is Jesus expecting us to pull our eye out or recognize the seriousness of sin? In Luke chapter 9, verse 60, Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. Is Jesus expecting the dead to bury themselves? Or rather, is Jesus dramatically pointing out that we need to focus on what matters in life and not be distracted by minor details or worries? Along the same point, have you ever noticed at the airport check-in counter people bringing in so much luggage? They are weighed down by their luggage. These people not only have to pay extra, but must also wait in the baggage claim area until all their luggage arrives. I wonder if this is a metaphor of the teachings of Jesus and cautions us about having too much baggage or bring along more than we need. I invite you to reflect on the hidden costs of our possessions. We might be ultimately better off with less luggage than more. So likely Jesus is making it clear that they are not to have anything to slow them down or get in the way. Sharing our faith can be intense. And Jesus even instructs the disciples not to move around when they are visiting a community, but to stay in one place. Bizarre that Jesus would be advising his disciples not to be prepared, no food, etc. Likely, Jesus is pointing out that what we need is to trust that God will provide. I must admit, it isn't always what we want, but rather what we need. Trusting that God will be there for us is great, but it doesn't mean that we do nothing. St. Paul experienced this attitude with the Thessalonians, who understood that they didn't have to do anything anymore because they were saved. We see this in the second letter of Paul to the Thessalonians, chapter 3, verse 11. Our faith isn't only about ourselves. Jesus gave his disciples instructions on what to do when they are rejected. He is quite direct. Not only are the disciples instructed to leave, but they are to shake the dust off their feet. The act of shaking dust off one's feet carries several symbolic messages and meanings. It was a symbolic gesture to show disapproval of those who rejected the message or refused hospitality. It signified a complete break or separation from those who were unreceptive to the teaching. In the biblical context, it served as a warning of divine judgment for those who rejected the message. And lastly, it represented a cleansing of oneself from any negative association with the rejection or negative experience. My last point for this podcast is to invite you to notice that Jesus appears to be giving advice on how to live one's Christian spirituality. He doesn't direct his disciples on ways to bring about conversion in people, nor does he provide direction of where they should go or who they should reach out to. If this gospel was about giving advice about effective ministry, you would think Jesus himself would share his experiences on conversion. His advice, however, is for anyone who wants to develop their spirituality. So often people leave it up to ministers, priests, or other religious professionals to share the faith. I think people have misunderstood the metaphor of the sheep following Christ, to be fed and fleeced. I urge you to read the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, chapter 12, verse 12 to 27, where St. Paul reminds his listeners that we are all parts of the same body. It makes sense. As I often have told parishioners, we could have a beautiful church, lovely music, insightful sermons or homilies, but if people do not feel welcomed or valued, they won't feel they belong. A maturing spirituality involves sharing with others the gifts you have received from God. St. Paul gives us clear teachings on how our gifts together bring about a deepening faith for the whole community. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of Mark, who describes Jesus recognizing the people's desire to learn more about who God is. And Jesus also brings out another aspect of ministry. If this is the first time you've heard my podcast and you are interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcasts listed on the website. Every Sunday I release a new podcast focusing on the gospel for the following week. I invite you to listen to all the podcasts, and I hope the reflections are useful to you. The link is https://psychologist_looks_at_scripture.buzzsprout.com. The podcast is also available on YouTube. I'd also like to take this opportunity and thank my team, Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulomb, an important part in the preparation for this podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty, O-M-I, that's DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. Have a great week, and God bless you.